Welcome to a mystery adventure. Today we're in search of some chaga. Chaga is a medicine or fungus that grows on birch trees, usually around streams and higher altitudes. So we'll see if we can find any. Stay tuned, we'll find out. There are three main fungi that thrive on birch trees of all kinds, and these are the tender conch, the chaga, and the birch polypore. We will return to the roles of the others later and focus on the chaga for now. Not long into our hike, we found our first chaga. As you can see, the staining on this silver birch. There's brown staining on the white and silver parts of the birch. And as we go up, we see our first chaga. As you can see, the hard, almost coal-like fungus, chaga, forms out of some sort of damage in the tree. And this is too high for us to get, so we'll keep hiking. We'll find some more. Here we have chaga that used to be chaga, or at least it was a big clump, and as you can see, someone has already taken it from the tree. We see that there's young chaga growing here inside, so we're going to leave these colonies alone, and in several years this should regrow into a healthy chunk. Again, we found another chunk. As we can see, this has been recently harvested in the last year or two. Up there, where you can see the fresh orange, and down there. But as we can see, the chaga colony is regenerating. So if we leave this alone, in several years we'll have larger chunks. And here we have two spots of chaga that we can finally harvest. I see that this tree is in a spot where it's already dying. It's already got a split part of it that has fallen off. And as I look up, I see that this tree is really dying out and suffocating. So that tells me that this is a good time to get the chaga, as well as seeing that the chaga itself is already starting to deteriorate. So what I've got is the hatchet and a knife, and I'll go ahead and use the hatchet and just chop this away. I don't want to take too much because, again, I'd like to leave a little bit for it to propagate for as long as this tree will survive. And there we go. Got our first chunk of chaga. This orange yellowish part is really what you're looking for. This is the live colony, and this is where your polysaccharides and all your healthy parts, the medicine that is going to be located. We've got a nice chunk there, and I'll go ahead and try to take off another chunk here as well. And there we have it. And I think I'll leave that. This last chunk will be enough to allow this to propagate any further as long as this tree lives, and perhaps help proliferate the chaga through the area. And our last piece of the day, a little nub. Again, the tree seems to be dying, suffocated from the outside, and won't be long before this falls into the stream. So we'll go ahead and take this piece, and that'll be it for the day. Well, that was a success. Let's head to the kitchen and turn our chaga into something edible. Now that we've harvested our chaga and let it sit and dry for a week or two, it's time to take it into the kitchen and process it into smaller chunks so that our crockpot can have as much surface area as possible. You'll find that chaga primarily comes off the tree in fairly large chunks. The polysaccharides that we're after are found in these orange parts, so if we break the chaga up into smaller chunks, it'll allow more surface area for the water in the crockpot. Now you'll find several methods of breaking the chaga into smaller chunks. It is fairly hard, so one method I like best is actually using a Ziploc bag, putting the chunk in the bag, and actually smashing it with a wooden hammer or mallet. By doing this on the counter, it makes a lot of noise, you'll find out, but again, it's well worth it to get in smaller chunks, as you'll see. After you've got your chunks small enough, it's time to put them in the crockpot and fill it all the way with water. Set it on high and let it sit for 24 hours. After that time, fill it once more full of water and let it sit for another 24 hours before moving on to the next step of the process. After about 24 hours, the liquid has reduced by about half. The top was covered with nice golden bubbles, which is the sign that the polysaccharides are being released. Now it's time to fill this crockpot full of water once more and let go for another 24 hours. Now that our chaga is finished in the crockpot, it's time to filter it, strain it, and put it into a small pot on the stove. Turn it on high and get it to boil, and once the bubbling starts, reduce it down to medium-low and let it simmer and boil until the consistency starts changing. Here in a moment we'll see this turn from this nice, rich, dark, and red liquid into a very thick and bubbling concoction. Here the chaga has finally reached a boil. We're going to let this sit for a better part of an hour until the consistency begins to change. You'll know if you agree with chaga at this point, for the smell is absolutely amazing. It's too bad we don't have smell-o-vision. As the chaga preparation boils down, you'll notice that the sides of the pot will have this hardened surface. And we'll also notice that the bubbles tend to show a different consistency. Here, not quite as liquidy. If we see on the spoon, spin it around a few times, then dump it. Quite a bit remains behind. That golden red sheen lets me know that we're getting pretty close. So I'm going to keep this here on medium, medium-high, and then reduce down to medium-low once more. I'm going to keep a very solid eye on this consistency. Once these bubbles start to get larger and we see the concoction getting soupier, we know that we're pretty close to stopping. We're trying to boil out all of the water from our concoction so that what's behind is a creamy substance. And that's a very large concentration of the polysaccharides and beta-glucans, the good parts of the chaga that we like to have. I can tell the chaga is just about ready. Here, if I stir the pot just a moment, you'll see that the consistency in the bubbles change dramatically. That flare-up right there tells me that this concoction is getting a lot thicker with the polysaccharides and that the water is starting to boil off quite a lot. And so, if we take a spoon, you'll notice that it stays on the spoon. There's quite a lot of the chaga preparation, so stir it around, let it cool off, and as I let it go, we see that it begins to get pretty sticky. And that tells me that this is just about done. See how much retains on the spoon. That tells me just a few more minutes of this stirring and a few more minutes of this heat. And now we can see the consistency has changed entirely. Rather than a soupy liquid, we now have a fairly sticky substance. If we see, it's very sticky to the spoon, and that tells me it is time to pour this out. So have a container ready, and we'll want to pour this into that container abruptly. If you go too far, the chaga will burn and it will become hard and crystallized like burnt sugar, as we can see in the bottom of this pan. But that's okay, this part is still salvageable. I'll go ahead and add water to this and return it to my crockpot for round 2 of the extraction. If you would not like to do round 2, go ahead and rinse this out with water and serve a nice warm tea, for this is still a lot of the polysaccharides that wouldn't want to be wasted. Now with our preparation, we're going to go ahead and let this cool off, and then once it's fairly room temperature, we'll cover it and put it in the fridge. This will maintain the cream consistency, and we can add this to coffees, teas, ice cream even. One thing to be sure though, make sure this is put in the freezer if you're going to keep it for a long period of time. It will mold, so you want to make sure that we freeze it to keep it as long as possible. And how do you like your chaga?
I like to put my chaga in warm milk, sometimes with honey and sometimes without.
Nice. And how about you? How do you like your chaga?
I like to put it in my herbal coffee.
In your herbal coffee?
Mm-hmm.
What's it taste like?
It sort of tastes like sweetness in my herbal coffee, and I also like to put milk with it.
Delicious. Thank you. And how do you like your chaga?
Mostly I like it in my coffee.
How is it?
It's good.
Well, thanks for joining me for this mystery adventure. I sure hope you learned something. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to email me at mr.escholar@gmail.com. And stay tuned for other adventures and episodes on the natural living section of my website at www.mrescholar.com. Thanks and happy learning.